Three, two, oh, hold on.
Good morning, Just Jane 1813 readers, and thank you for joining us here today as we help Karen Cox launch her latest Jap variation titled I Could Write a Book. This book is actually a big departure for Karen and for Jap authors in general because she has been brave enough to actually write a variation based on Jane Austen's book, Emma. This book is one that I have been really excited about for quite a while because not only is it based on a story that I love, Karen also brings a great, fresh new setting and energy to the Emma storyline. The book is also receiving a lot of positive reviews so far. Meredith at Austen-esque Reviews last week gave Karen a 5-star review, which is really quite lovely. And on Goodreads, our launch team has been leaving lots of nice reviews as well. And you can read them on Goodreads. And today you'll be able to see them on Amazon as well, as we hope lots of other readers join us in helping us to read and enjoy this book all over. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Karen and welcome her to Just Jane 1813. She's actually in her home in Kentucky. I'm in New York, so we kind of have this long distance conversation going on, which I love. And I'm just so glad that she's been brave enough to take this chance and do my first video chat with me. She's been a great sport and she's worked really hard to get the technology right for us. So Karen, welcome. And today, will you tell us about your book and give us an idea about what inspired you to write a book based on Emma, and give us a flavor and an idea about your setting as well.
Well, thank you for having me on Just Jane 1813. It's sort of funny when you say that I was brave enough to take on Emma, because I feel like I really didn't know what I was getting into when I did it. It's a book that's taken me a long time to write. I've been writing it for about 4 years now. Of course, I did other projects in between, so I would do work on it for a while and then go back. But originally, when I started thinking about doing an adaptation of Emma, I had this idea several years ago that I would take each of Austen's novels and set them in a different setting in the 20th century, sort of adapt them and sort of try to carry forth those themes. And I've talked about this before in other interviews and things that I've had. Carry forth the themes, the characters, some of the things that I saw in Austen that I thought I would really like for modern readers to be able to see as well. So the first book that I did was 1932, and that takes place in the Great Depression. So it's sort of an early novel of Emma's. And so I sort of set it early in the 20th century. I feel like the 20th century there's a lot of going on politically and socially and historically. And I think in some ways the United States in the 20th century and, other parts of the world, but the United States obviously is what I know. There's just so much going on, and it's sort of analogous to the way the Regency period is in England. There's a lot of things going on in England at the time. So I thought that those things kind of went together well. So I started with 1932 in the Depression, and then my second book was called Find Wonder in All Things, and it was an adaptation or variation of Persuasion, which was, of course, Austen's last novel that was published after her death. And that takes place in the 1990s and early 2000s. So then, I worked on some other projects, did some short stories, did Undeceived, which is the Pride and Prejudice and the Spy Gang Cold War novel. And then I decided that it was time to go back to Emma. And I had started this back in 2013 by rereading Emma, taking a lot of notes, and writing maybe 25% of it, a third of it. And then I decided to just really sort of work on it in earnest. And I chose the 1970s because Emma's sort of in the middle of Austen's work, and the 70s are sort of in the middle of the 20th century. So that was why Emma. That was how I came to. And there are a lot of themes in Emma that I really love, and I didn't even really know how many there are until I really dug into it the second or third time that I went into it. As far as Kentucky, 1932 is set in Kentucky. I wasn't born in Kentucky, but my family's from here, both sides of my family. And 1932 takes place in the area of the state where my father is from. And Fine Wonder takes place in the area of the state where my mother is from. And Emma takes place in the area, near the area where I live now. It's like sort of the town that I selected as sort of my real life Highbury is one county over from where I live. So, and it's a little town called Midway that I've always loved. And it's very quaint, and it just seemed like it was a very good setting for a story like Emma and for Highbury. So that's kind of how, they always say you should write what you know, and I've lived here since 1977, so when I was about 11 years old. So I know this place, and I feel like that sort of helps me anyway, sort of infuse some authenticity to the story. So that was how the 70s and Kentucky and Emma all came together.
Wow, that's very interesting, and I love hearing about that because I think that it also is similar to the process that Austen went through as well. She wrote about the parts of England mainly that she knew as well, and based on areas that she was pretty familiar with as well from what we know about her work. Karen, one of the challenges ahead of you when you wrote this story was taking what Austen said, a heroine that she thought that no one would really like very much, and you had to write a whole story about her. That's difficult to do, even though I love Emma, you love Emma. There aren't necessarily as many readers who love Emma as some of Austen's other heroines. So can you tell us what it was like to write a book based on a heroine like this, and what did you do to make your Emma more likable? I really think that your Emma has a bit more, I can't say charm, I think she just has a more likable character to her. And I would love for you to describe to readers how you approached your Emma.
Well, I love Emma, and I have since I first read the book, and I say that with an acceptance of all her faults. I know that she's a snot. I know that she's haughty. I know that she makes mistakes. I know that she looks down on people but for some things, but not for others. So she's sort of inconsistent. I think that I think that we are sometimes uncomfortable with Emma because there's all the things that we don't like in her, perhaps are things that we have seen in ourselves or we have seen in people that we know. And so when we read it, it's kind of, icky, gosh, why did she do that? I really wish she hadn't done that. Or I remember when I did something like that and I felt this way. Or I remember when someone else did this to me. Or
when I thought I knew better than everyone else.
Yes, because we've all been there, right? We've all thought that we know best. And as you get older, you realize that you don't always know what's best for everybody. So, but I still love her. And as I read through the book the second time, one of the things that really struck me was how she could have been such a weaker woman than she was, because she doesn't have very much guidance. She's had a lot of stuff happen to her. Really, when you look at it from 21st century eyes, it's not so much from, a lot of things happen to people 200 years ago that don't happen now in families. But she's had a lot happen to her, but she makes her way. Now, a lot of the reasons she makes her way is because she can. She has her money, and she has her family, and she has her home, unlike a lot of Austen's other heroines that don't have those things. But that was one thing that struck me about her, was that she could have been a much weaker woman than she ended up being. The other thing that I saw in her was this love for family, and sort of, sacrificing. I mean, I guess maybe she didn't have a choice, to sacrifice for her family. But she doesn't seem to be particularly bitter or angry about it. And that was one thing that I really wanted to try to bring forth in my Emma. And I made a decision, Christina Boyd, my editor, and we made a decision relatively early on because at first the whole thing was written in alternating points of view, but they were all third person points of view. And so we made the decision early on to write the Emma pieces in first person. And I think that helps me. It helped me as an author, and I think it helps readers get into her heart and into her mind, and sort of see things the way she sees them. Because when you see things the way she sees them, then you understand why she acts the way she does. And then the third person from Knightley's point of view is really just sort of an indulgence for me because I love Knightley so much. So, but that was one of the things, some of the things that I tried to do to make Emma a likable heroine, because she's a person who really does have other people's best. I mean, she wants the best for other people, the people that she loves. She just thinks that she knows what's best.
So, Karen, since you're talking about Emma, I want to read something from the book, and I want your ideas about what I'm going to suggest here. She talks about in the book at one point her definition of what a modern woman is. And she says the freedom to use your socioeconomic status to chart your own path, but based on who you are, not what your family has. And I wonder, is your Emma a modern day woman? Do you think Austen's Emma was a modern day woman? And do you think necessarily that that's such a closely or carefully defined thing anyway?
Well, I think that Emma thinks that she's a modern woman. I think that she, of course, women's roles were changing pretty quickly at this point in our history. The 60s and the 70s, more women are going into the workforce. There's the widespread use of birth control, which means people can plan their families in a way that they couldn't before, or wasn't as easy to plan them as it was after the birth control pill came in to use in 1960. So I think that Emma has all these ideas that society is telling her about what modern women do. Modern women chart their own paths. They make their own decisions. They're careful at work. They don't need marriage, and they don't need men to be fulfilled, and all these things that she's been told. But Emma is a young woman, a very young woman, who by her where she is geographically, but also where she is in her family, and the burdens and the things that she's taking on with her family. She's kind of bridging two different worlds in a way. Kentucky at that time, and still to a large degree, is very traditional. And I think that, Emma's parents were very traditional in their roles. So she's sort of seeing that. And there's sort of an irony, I think, because she's always telling Mary Jo, who's the Miss Smith character, and I could write a book. She's always saying, you should do this to be a modern woman. You should do that to be a modern woman. You don't need to be with Robert Martin. You need to be exploring your options. And you need to do this, that, and the other thing. So, but in a lot of ways, it's Mary Jo who's really what we would consider a modern woman. She's the one who's left home. She's the one who's gotten a job, sort of away from her family and away from everything that she's familiar with. And she's the one who's sort of charting her own path. Now, she's naive and she's easily led, but in a lot of ways, she's doing things that Emma isn't doing. But I think there's one of the reasons, perhaps, that she likes Mary Jo so much. One of the reasons is because Mary Jo's easily led. But I think another reason is that she can see the potential for things that she might have liked to do, but wasn't able to do because of her situation.
Sure. So you talk about the Harriet Smith character of Mary Jo. Now, Knightley says in your book that she is a steady diet of candy for Emma. And he is really not happy that Emma is spending so much time with someone that doesn't challenge her or question her. And he feels really uncomfortable with that for Emma. So, can you tell us a little bit about your angle for the Knightley and Emma relationship and why you think that Knightley is feeling this frustration and this just this need to like kind of intervene with that when Emma's just a family friend and he's not looking to be in love with Emma or involved with Emma, but he still finds this aspect and other aspects of her life, like the fact that she doesn't focus on one thing or fulfill her potential the way he thinks she should. Well, like, tell us about that relationship.
Well, when I went back and dug into Emma in the novel, into Austen's novel, I sort of had this idea from reading it the first time that Mr. Knightley's just this very kind, sweet, gentlemanly, charming man, and he is those things.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also kind of like Emma in that he really thinks that he knows what's best for her, and probably more than Austen did. I played that up a little bit because I think that that's one thing that they have in common. That's a similarity perhaps in their personalities that allows them to sort of connect a little bit, is that they truly are peers in this small community of Highbury. And there really aren't that many peers. I mean, as far as people who are have the same kinds of experiences that they have because they're both wealthy, people who have the same kind of intellect that they have because they're both smart. And I think that that's what he's reacting to. He doesn't. I mean, Mary Jo has her own charm, and she's certainly not a silly, stupid girl at all. But I think he thinks that Emma needs somebody to challenge her, and that Mary Jo's just not it. But when you look around, given the way Emma's living her life at this point in her life, she's very sheltered, and there's not a whole lot of other options.
So your Knightley and Emma relationship is also a little bit different because we're able to see George involved with other women throughout the story, and you also bring the characters together, then they spend time apart, then they're together again. So can you tell us a little bit more too about that aspect of their relationship and how you tried to develop that arc for them as well?
Well, of course, in Austen's novel, they're 16 years apart, which of course wasn't. They didn't see that back in Austen's day the same way that we see it now, and I understand that. But I felt like I really did need to narrow that age gap a little bit between them so that they would be able to connect a little bit better. So I halved it. So instead of them being 16 years apart, they're 8 years apart, which is still a lot, and it's still a lot. During most of the story, George is around 30 and she's around 22, and those are big differences, and it would be different if she were 35 and he were 43, for example, than if she's still in college and he's out of law school and is running a business, learning how to run the Donwell Farms. So that was one thing that I did, was to try and sort of make them connect a little bit better, was to narrow that age range a little bit.
Now, when you speak of George, it's hard not to then bring up the other main man, Frank, who you say is a man whose name is bound up in his fate. So tell us about your Frank Churchill character, because, as you know, he plays a pivotal role in your story as well. and how you also developed him in a way that helps George realize what's happening with him in regards to his feelings for Emma.
Well, I sort of said that, yes, Frank's name is bound up in his fate. He's not really Frank at all. He's a little sneak is what he is. And he is in this novel as well, for slightly different reasons that make more sense in the 20th century than the reason that Frank was sneaky in the 18th century or 19th century. So Frank, I think, when I go back and revisit Austen's novel, Frank he plays a much more important role than you think at the beginning. You think he's just this guy who's coming in, but the role that he performs for Emma is that he starts to, she starts to compare, several times during the novel, she's comparing George to Frank. Mm-hmm. And then for Frank, it's sort of this, well, he doesn't want Frank. I mean, for George, he doesn't want Frank to have Emma. He starts to realize that, and he doesn't really think too much about Emma in that way until all of a sudden there's the threat of him losing her that way. Another way that George, even though he's sweet and charming and gentlemanly, he's not perfect, and all of a sudden he sees that there's something that he wanted and he didn't know he wanted until he thought that someone else was going to have it.
Mm-hmm. Which I love. Makes him more human, like the rest of us. So you loved these characters, I believe, that you just discussed. But Karen, was there a character that you struggled to write in this story? There are so many characters. I bet you didn't love them all the same way. So could you tell us, was there anyone that you struggled with and what that was like for you as a writer?
Probably the character that I struggled with the most was the Mrs. Elton character. And I just don't like her. I really don't like her. And
not a surprise.
Yeah. So that was one place where I really got stuck when I was writing. When she was about to appear, I'm like, how am I going to do this? I mean, I don't even know that I can pull this off. I don't know that I can write a woman like that. And not just because I don't like her, because I didn't particularly like Mr. Elton either, but he was easier to write for some reason. But she was just, I don't know what it is. It was hard to make her say things that were mean, I guess. It's a good way, because she kind of jibes at people, and she's so unpleasant that I just found it unpleasant to write her. One of the characters that I had the most fun writing was Mr. Woodhouse, because I spent a lot of my early career working in hospitals and in nursing homes and doing home health and things with people who, older people. And I'm a speech pathologist, so that's where that comes from. And he's just sort of a conglomeration of a lot of people that I met when I was doing that kind of work. I found them charming, and even though he has his issues, I found him very easy to write and very fun to write.
That's great. Well, I have a soft spot for Mr. Woodhouse too. I actually have a soft spot for a lot of the Austen fathers. Karen, you talked a little bit about your block or your struggle with the Mrs. Elton character. Can you tell us about what your writing process was like with this novel? I know that writers are very unique in the way that they approach stories, and I'd love to hear your approach to writing this book, and I'm sure you know more of the lingo to describe that process than I do, so I'd love to hear it, and I think my readers would too.
Okay, well, things are a little bit different with each book, I'm finding. It's not like I set out with this process saying this is the way I'm going to do this. There's sort of this idea that there's two kinds of writers. There's those who plot everything out and have everything organized and outlined, and then they write from that. And then you have, on the other extreme, you have these people who are called pantsers. So they write by the seat of their pants. And I'm kind of a hybrid of each of those. But I've sort of developed a process that kind of works for me, over time. I've never had a formal writing class. I've read books and trying to improve my craft, but I've never had anybody sort of tell me what to do. So I kind of had to discover some of that on my own. But typically what I do is I'll have the events of the story sort of lined out a little bit. And sometimes I'll make little character, like I'll talk about my characters. I give them birthdays and pets and, things that they like, hobbies that they have. And sort of just kind of get to know them a little bit. And then, so I typically write dialogue first. So I'll go through and I'll have a scene in mind and I'll write dialogue, and that's kind of my first thing. And then I'll go back, and this makes some people crazy because I don't write in sequence. I've never written in sequence.
Wow.
And I know you and I have talked about this before. I don't read in sequence either, and that makes a lot of people really, really crazy because spoilers don't bother me because I've probably read the end already. So I write dialogue first, then I sort of put in the settings and the descriptions about things, go back and put that in, and then I'll sort of do the transitions, how things sort of hook things together, and then I'll look at word choice and sentence structure and things like that. And then I start to do it's sort of analogous to maybe sanding wood. So I sort of go back over it and go back over it and go back over it until it seems smooth to me. And that's a pretty time-consuming process, which is one of the reasons why it takes me so long to write. But it's something that works for me, and that's just sort of how I do it. There have been some differences with the books. 1932 was a first draft that came very easily and very quickly, about 6 weeks for first draft on that one. I've never written anything else that fast. And Fine Wonder was, I did the NaNoWriMo to try and get that, the first draft of that, because first draft is really where I struggled the most. I like to edit, and sort of, because it's sort of like making something that's already there better, and that I like, but doing the first draft and going off into that, it's sort of like going off into this wilderness, where you can't really see where you're going sometimes, and that's just a lot of work for me. But 1932 was easy. Fine Wonder was a little bit harder. This one was hard. Undeceived was hard in the sense that there was so much research involved in doing it, because it was, the 1980s and it was the CIA, and I was having to do a lot of reading and a lot of research on that. And I joke with people that I'm still waiting for Homeland Security to show up at the door from all those computer searches that I did during that time. So far, knock on wood, nobody's been outside. But so this book, first draft was just, I knew where I was going. And I guess that's maybe one of the differences. I really knew what I wanted to put across in this book. But it was tedious because Emma, the novel, and the Austen novel is not tedious, but it's so involved. You've got all this doublespeak from Frank Churchill, and you've got, Miss Bates and her big long, soliloquies that she has where she pushes a plot point, and all of a sudden or she says something really funny, and I know that I can't do that the same way that Austen did. So I really sort of tried to focus on the themes that I saw and on the characters, to try and make them appealing to modern readers, so perhaps they'll go back and say, I would like to read Austen's original and see what the differences are and what the similarities are.
So you just said that you don't expect it to be like Austen. So why do you write books based on Jane Austen's characters? Where, maybe tell us about the beginning, what inspired you to set on this course for yourself as a writer? Why Austen? Why write about her characters?
Austen, because she's a genius, and I feel some affinity for her because I feel like, she was sort of in the middle, this middle-class woman in the countryside in England, with a little bit of family support, but and a little bit of education and, those sorts of things. And I felt some affinity for that because I think in a lot of ways I've felt that way myself. I'm sort of here in, where I live in a small town, with a little bit of education and, caring for a family and doing things like that. So, but yet she was still able to write. So she always appealed to me as a woman and as a writer, because she was such a pioneer in a place where you wouldn't expect a pioneer to be. So that was how I got interested, in Austen. And then as I read her novels, I just thought that this is genius. This is going to apply to human beings forever. I mean, she understands human nature, and the themes that she talks about. The theme in Pride and Prejudice that first impressions aren't always accurate. The theme in Persuasion that if both people want to make things work, it's never too late for a second chance. The theme in Mansfield Park, where everything that is good isn't beautiful, and everything that's beautiful isn't good. And then with Emma, a lot of you're just not as smart as you think you are. Those things will go on forever, because we're all human beings, and she wrote the human condition so well. And I guess what I thought, and there's a little bit of hubris in it, I'm sure. I thought if I can see these parallels to modern day life, I would like to share those with other readers, so that they can see them too. And that was just sort of how I started with all of this. And it's fun, and I love the characters. And it's just a lot of fun.
That was beautiful. I just love this idea of the video chat, because that could never be conveyed in the same way in a written interview. And I thank you so much for sharing that with us. Karen, I also wanted to ask you about where you are planning to go after this. What's next, maybe for Karen Cox, for you as an author? Are you still going to work in the century that you're in now, or?
Well, I'm sort of at a place where I'm not quite sure exactly what I'm going to do next. I mean, if I sort of stick with my original plan and I do, Austen in different novels and different decades, I still got to do Sense and Sensibility, which is, I like it okay, but it's not my favorite novel.
My second favorite. It's my second favorite one.
Is it your second favorite?
Mm-hmm.
My second favorite. Well, Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion kind of toggle back and forth for me as far as, which one is my favorite. But and maybe I just need to go back and dig into Sense and Sensibility the same way I did with Emma. And I'll see the things that, I'd like to bring forth with that. And then Mansfield Park, Lordy, I don't know if I could do that. I mean, I've done a short story about Northanger Abbey, so I sort of have an idea, I've kind of done that. A short story isn't like a full-length novel, but so I don't know if I'll do that or not. I might. I don't really know for sure that I'm going to be able to complete my original task. I mean, we're talking about a lot of work.
Yes,
so, I have some ideas. I'm going to do a short story in the Dangerous to Know anthology that's coming out in November. And then
you're writing about a rake? You're writing about a rake?
Yes, I am. Guess which rake I'm writing about?
Well,
Frank Churchill.
Ooh.
I felt like I could probably do that one because I just spent a lot of time with Frank Churchill. But it's Regency, and I've not written anything for publication that's Regency before, so there's some challenges there for me. But I've got some good help, so I'm hoping that it'll come out okay. And then after that, I think I'm going to take a little bit of a break and maybe catch up on some reading. I have a job and I have kids. I have a granddaughter that I spoil a lot. And I sometimes I feel like I can either write or I can read. and that's all I have time for. I don't like that, and I think that in order to be a good writer, you do have to read. So I think it's time for me to maybe catch up on some reading. I've got some ideas for stories, for Westerns, and I've got a women's fiction piece that I started, and it's based on one of my characters from the very first story that I wrote, which was it's called D-Day. It's about the Derby, about the Kentucky Derby, and they're in that story, Darcy's mother is living, and she's a widow, and his grandmother, his paternal grandmother, so this woman's mother-in-law, and she plays a nice role in the story, and I was really taken with Anne's story. So I'm thinking, I might try to complete it at some point. So, but I've also thought about the 20th century, like early in 20th century in the West. And I don't know. Who knows where I'll go? I don't know.
That sounds exciting. So Karen, before we close here, I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of a blurb for what you would say to the reader who is not sure if this is a variation that he or she would like to read. What would you personally compile as the advertisement for reading I Could Write a Book?
Okay, well, I had a feeling you were going to ask me. So
okay.
I wrote a couple things, so now I have to put my glasses on so I can read them. Okay, so here's my attempts at elevator pitches. I'm not particularly good at elevator pitches. I can't say anything in 20 seconds or less, but I'm going to try. So the first one is: indulged yet well-meaning young woman tries to rule her small world like a queen in her realm, but finds herself wearing the jester's hat when love ambushes her from a most unlikely source.
Ooh.
Here's another one. All's well that ends well in this romantic comedy that touches on deeper themes such as family, social class, and finding one's own path in turbulent times. Okay, nice. So maybe, I don't know, that might appeal to some people. And then the last one is: Fanny Flagg and Jane Austen collide in the middle of the 20th century as a young woman's well-meaning plots and plans threatened to turn a small southern town upside down. So I don't know, maybe that'll sort of entice people to give I Could Write a Book a try.
And I think that once readers see the reviews that will hopefully be coming very soon on Amazon, and they can go and check out the ones already on Goodreads. And as I said before, the lovely one that Meredith wrote for her blog, Austen-esque Reviews, I think that readers will be really interested in giving your book a try as well. So the book is called I Could Write a Book. It opens today. And Karen, thank you so much for being here and for treating my readers to this in-depth and personal look at your life as a writer and into your new book.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm just so grateful to you and to all the people who have helped. The people on the launch team who have helped so much. My editor Christina Boyd. You've been so much help with the blog tour. All the stops on the blog tour. Everyone's just been very, very lovely. Made this process a lot less isolating and intimidating than I thought it was going to be. So it's been wonderful. It's been a good experience. Thank you.
You're welcome, Karen. Have a great launch day.